Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Lillian and I like to talk about books. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in the month of December. I actually made my way through quite a number of books because I had some time off of work, so let's go ahead right into the video. The first book I'm going to talk about is called Beautiful Country by Wang. This is a memoir by an Asian American woman and it came out in 2021. It's about her experience growing up in Brooklyn, New York as the child of undocumented immigrants. And I really appreciated this memoir because of her perspective on what it's like to be in a lower socioeconomic class. And what I really liked about this book is just seeing through a child's eyes all of these formative experiences and the struggles that she went through to feel like she really belonged in the US, and eventually she does move to Canada and get Canadian citizenship. Each of these chapters is a recollection or an anecdote ranging from memories in school to fights that her parents had, and that's what I really liked about the book, was just really feeling the pain and the power of being a child when you're going through that kind of thing. I recommend checking this out, and I will give it a 4.6 out of 5. The second book that I read in December is also an Asian American memoir. This one is by Alexandra Chang. It was recommended to me by my friend Amira, so thank you so much, Amira, for recommending this. It's called Days of Distraction, and this is about the protagonist who is moving cross-country from her hometown in Northern California to Ithaca because her partner is doing a PhD at Cornell. It really reads as something that's semi-autobiographical, although I'm not exactly sure if she would call it that or a full-on memoir. For me, what I did like about this book is I felt that it really hit on a lot of the current feelings and discussion around what it's like to live as an Asian American in the US today. In particular, the main character is kind of grappling with the fact that she's been in a long-term relationship with a white man for her entire adult life, and as an Asian American, what kind of fetishes or stereotypes is that feeding into? Or is it just love, and love knows no colors or no boundaries? But definitely throughout this memoir, you can see she challenges her partner and asks him to consider more the role of race in the relationship. What I didn't like about this book, it kind of felt really like a debut novel. Not to think too much of myself, but this is the kind of book where I kind of feel like if I spent a lot of time, could have written this myself. It just didn't feel like it had a lot of additional weight or additional polish to it. It really felt like a debut novel and kind of really reflected that idiom of write what you know. But it did kind of at times feel a little bit too self-indulgent and more like her diary that was just spruced up a bit, as opposed to a memoir, which I think should have multiple iterations of consideration and rewrites to really make it something that's digestible by an external audience. So a lot of the thoughts and reflections that Alexandra has are definitely interesting, and I want to engage with them, but in terms of a literary work, it kind of fell flat for me. I will give this a 4.0 out of 5. Next, I'm going to talk about 2 self-help books that I read, and both of these were recommended to me by my friend Ginny, and she also lent me her copies, so thank you so much, Ginny, for recommending these great books. The first that I'm going to talk about is kind of a memoir / self-help book. It's called Wintering: The Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times by Katherine May, and this book came out in 2020. I really like this book because she talks about both the metaphor and the literal occurrence or phenomenon of seasons, and how important it is to recognize that winter, just like it's a natural season throughout the year, is also a natural part of your life. And she is talking about, going through a troubling time, a rough patch, a rough season where obviously a lot of us have gone through that with the pandemic, but also maybe you have a family loss or a health issue. And her main point is that instead of trying to avoid feeling anything and feeling bad in those times, we should really learn how to hunker down, listen to ourselves, figure out and learn how to take care of ourselves, and that process is what she refers to as wintering. As someone who lives on a tropical island very close to the equator, I also found her points around literal seasons really interesting, because I do feel like because we get sunshine all day, every day, year round in Singapore, sometimes it does lead to a bit of that stressed out feeling, like there's never really a time where the weather is really crappy outside for multiple days, and so you just stay at home and rest and kind of hibernate. And she talks about in the book some research that shows that both animals and humans during the winter, obviously animals who hibernate, but even humans, as the days get shorter in the winter, will sleep much longer. And so that's kind of a natural cue from the earth to take a break and to recharge. I love how she both used the metaphor of seasons to talk about self-care and self-love, as well as actually looked at human history and gave examples of different practices like cold water bathing or natural phenomenon like aurora borealis to really drive home the fact that it's something that has been happening for centuries and is part of nature. I forgot to rate this book. I will rate it a 4.5 out of 5. The other self-help book I'm going to talk about is This Naked Mind, Find Freedom, Discover Happiness, and Change Your Life by Annie Grace. This came out in 2018. And you might be a bit skeptical and think it's kind of cheesy, but I actually learned a lot from this book. I'm trying to quit drinking just because I don't think alcohol really serves me anymore. And as someone who has led a very boozy expat life, I wanted to see if this book could kind of help me stick to stopping drinking. And there are a couple of things I did really like that she said, but it's not going to be the most savvy, contemporary, and compelling argument for you to quit drinking. But one thing that I like that she said is she argues that alcohol is addictive, and the reason you love that first drink is because you're going through withdrawal and you're craving this addictive substance. Another point that I like that she made is something that I've often said, which is I like when everyone's had a drink or two because then they loosen up and they're a lot more comfortable. But she does kind of make the point that why do we expect to automatically feel comfortable in a room full of strangers and rely on a substance to fast forward the natural process of getting to know someone. One thing I didn't really agree with that she said is she's pretty convinced that you can't drink in moderation. She really advocates for cutting it out cold turkey. And part of me understands where she's coming from, because that really worked for me with vegetarianism. Once you tell yourself, I can't do ABC, it's very freeing and it's easier to stick to, I think. And that's basically her point, which is if you say, I can have a few drinks, just not a lot, you're almost dividing your mind and constantly thinking okay, well, can I have a drink if it's my friend's wedding or if it's Christmas dinner? And you're constantly thinking about whether I should be drinking and almost looking forward to that next drink. And so it's better or more likely to be successful if you just say, I'm not drinking. But on the other hand, I do feel like I can probably keep it to a 1-drink rule, so that's something I'm going to be experimenting with. If you are interested in starting your sober journey, I feel like this was a pretty good gateway book. A lot of interesting takeaways for me, at least. It's not going to be the cure-all one-stop shop, but it's a good start. And I'm going to rate this book a 4.2 out of 5. The next book I'm going to talk about is called Anxious People by Frederick Backman. It came out in 2019. Shout out to my friend Abby who recommended this book to me. I loved it, Abby. It was a great recommendation. I actually listened to this on audiobook on my drive home to Kentucky because I caught COVID. And I must say that the voice actor who delivered the audiobook was phenomenal. It's like listening to a fully acted play and listening to the story really come alive. So if you're into audiobooks, this is one I would recommend listening to. What is it about? It's a pretty complex story with a cast of characters who all live in Stockholm, and I really don't want to give away any of the plot because I do think this is a book that has great characters and a great plot, but essentially you get some flashbacks, some flash forwards. There's something that's happening in the present timeline where a robbery has happened while a few people are at an open house in Stockholm, but you get a lot of the backstory of the different characters, and you get to dive a bit deeper into the connections between the different characters, and there's a lot of funny and interesting exposition and also kind of character descriptions. These are characters that I really loved and I thought really came alive and came off the page, and so I do recommend checking this out if you want something that's plot driven and has an interesting story with really provoking and interesting characters. I also read this with my friend Ginny and she loved it, so I do recommend checking this out, and I will give it a 4.7 out of 5. The last book I'm going to talk about is my Singapore book of the month. I did not forget about Singapore. If you guys are new to my channel, you might not know I read a book about Singapore every single month. For the month of December, I read this book called Heartland by Daren Shiau. It came out in 1998, so it's a bit of an older book, and it's called by Lonely Planet the definitive Singaporean novel. So I will not lie, I saw that and I bought it immediately because I was like, okay, I have to read the definitive Singaporean novel. This book is definitely a bit outdated. It's definitely a product of its time, but I really loved how Daren was able to capture a feeling of like that late 90s, early 2000s era and everything Singapore was going through. So the name of the book, Heartland, really refers to this distinction that was brought up at that time between the urban cosmopolitan class and the Heartlanders, who are more likely to live in an HDB rather than a condo and probably speak Mandarin or dialect and have more working class jobs. This is a novel that tells a story about a young man who's navigating through that time. What I loved about this book was being able to connect to kind of this HDB core, which is like this very nostalgic descriptions and this evoking of like what it's like to live in Singapore back then. It's kind of like rose tinted and really made me feel like indulgent in that I was kind of just like really reveling in like all the things I love about Singapore, the feeling of community, the melting pot, how quickly everything is changing, but also how certain relics of previous eras are still preserved. If you live in Singapore, this is a really fun book to check out, I think, just because it's gonna reference like Beauty World or Golden Mile Complex or taking a bumboat out near Changi Port. Like there's a lot of that landscape description that really is fun to read and feels really nostalgic. What I didn't like about this book is I'm starting to realize that I don't always love coming of age stories from a male perspective. Last year I read Gold Diggers, which was from a male's perspective, and also The Train Leaving Atocha Station, I might be butchering the name, which was also a male perspective. And I just really get the vibes of like, woe is me, I'm so lost, I'm this like troubled boy, but I also can't like articulate my emotions. That kind of like grates me the wrong way. So it wasn't too overt in this book, but that was kind of the thing that annoyed me. He has multiple girls that he's interested in, but like he can't bring himself to be proactive and to communicate with them. I did think, you know, going through his internal dialogue around trying to navigate like the more atas or fancier, well-off segment of Singapore versus where he's from, staying in an HDB and needing to take care of his mother and having relatives in Malaysia, and you know what it's like to go into NS and all of these like very stereotypical Singaporean experiences was fun to read, so I did enjoy that. I do recommend checking this out if you live in Singapore and you want kind of a short novel. I thought it was pretty fun, not too whiny, so you will enjoy it, I think. I'm going to give this a 4.4 out of 5. I just want to say thank you so much if you made it this far. Let me know if you checked out any of these books, and I'll see you in the next one.
Meet me out in Uptown City where the store said you wanna go downtown, she blushing on the low.